Saturday sun, I met someone out on...
Hi, I'm Liz Burke, Conservation Educator for the Helena, Lewis and Clark National Forest. Normally, I'd be out with you on a forestry day, so we're hoping that this video gives you maybe a little bit of a taste of what we might be able to cover.
West Coast, I gotta get back, I can't let this go. Saturday sun.
So I'm going to be doing a temperature reading. This is one of the forestry readings we'd normally be doing. Always being very careful with the soil thermometer, pushing it straight into the ground, and it goes about 6 inches down in the ground. And any of you who have a cellar, a root cellar, you know, going into the crawl space or basement, you know that there's an incredible insulating power of the soil. We're going to compare how this soil temperature looks in this area compared to maybe a more shaded area. We're back in the ponderosa pine forest. Nice spacing between the trees. The needles are here, as well as we have some of that chipping we talked about earlier after all those dead and down trees. Those are degrading nicely. And we do have a lot of native grasses, like this blue bunch wheatgrass, coming up through the area. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of reading we get here in an open area versus an area that maybe doesn't get as much sunlight. We'll put that there for about a minute or two and see what kind of reading we get. This particular thermometer is in degrees Fahrenheit. And already you can see outside our temperature is a fairly cool day. We got some smoke out, but we're seeing that temperature go down. It's much cooler. We're getting about 52 degrees Fahrenheit for a temperature in an area that has nice covering with the mulch, some plant covering, but is not in a shaded area. So this is going to probably get a lot more sunlight than something that has a lot more tree cover, canopy cover in it.
I met someone, don't care what it costs, no ray of sunlight.
One of our favorite tests, of course, is the increment borer tool, which we use to get aging of this tree. As many of you know, you could tell how old a tree is if it's, cut off. You can count all the rings, because every year that a tree lays on another layer of wood, it gets another ring. Well, you can do that with a living tree using the increment borer. Simply place the borer through. This is called the catcher. This is called the tray, and the tray usually just stays here because we'll be using that in a minute. And we're going to go about 4.5 feet up into an area. For me, that's about my shoulder height. And we're going to want to go about halfway through the tree. We don't want to go all the way through the tree. So I'm going to really be watching that I don't go further than this way in. Put my tray right there. Healthy ponderosa pine tree. It is a little close to some of the other trees, but it still has a good 10 feet distance. It likes these open areas. And that bit grabs. Remember, I don't want to go further than this in. We're going to go in to where we think the halfway point is. You hear the tree talking to us. Okay, one more. Now we're going to take the tray. We're going to put that in underneath our sample here. We're going to go 1.5 times around. And then we're going to go halfway back, half a turn back, to crack off our sample. And let's see what we get. Ah, beautiful sample. Yes, and we will probably send this back with you so you have a sample of it. You see it okay? Normally, I will take off the bark. Remember, ponderosa pine has a thick bark that helps it. It's adapted to frequent low fires, so you'll always have a lot of bark that you'll need to do. And then you can see in those early years, there's that center of the tree. As it was growing, it must have had a lot of space. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 13, 14, 15, 16. For the first 16 years of its life, it's laying on wood pretty well, and you've got some nice spacing between those rings. But boy, it sure gets hard to see it as you go past those 16 years. The first 20 years, and then the next 30 years are even worse. So we're about 67 years old there, 77, 87. This could probably be about a 100-year-old tree, and you wouldn't expect it with it not being as wide as some of the other trees. But this tree had to compete with all these other trees for the resources here. Not only the ones that are here, but the ones that have died and have gone down. And we have some wonderful regeneration with new baby ponderosa pine trees. We'll have to see how they do. I would say roughly this is probably, we usually add about 10 years to the amount. I'd say this is about a 115-year-old tree right here. And I'll bring this back to the classroom and you guys can see how well I did or didn't do. But what would be really interesting is to come back in a couple years and see if the spacing between the rings gets wider. I can kind of see in the last 3 to 4 years there's wider spacing in this increment core borer here. So again, this is increment boring, and it's a great method for being able to age out the tree. So we're going to say it's about 115-year-old ponderosa pine tree. Diameter at breast height is DBH, and for me that is at the shoulder, so it's about 4.5 feet. You will want to take your measuring tape, and you should have this really slick side of the measuring tape that I've had some of the peak kids called pi inches, because they are 3.14 inches between each increment. Why is that? Well, they've done the math so that you can figure out the diameter of the tree without having to cut it down. They've already done the math for you with this tape. So diameter at breast height, or 4.5 feet. You'll want to go around your tree, and then one of the things I like to do is kind of go back and forth. I always make sure to put my tape around the back, but if you were to accidentally move it this way, you would actually be thinking it'd be like a 12.8, but we said it was 11.2. And what you're measuring it up to is where that 0 goes. So here we are, one more time, 4.5 feet. I measure it up, I make sure that it's nice and even, and right where that 0 hits, that's 11.2. So 11.2 dBH for this tree. And you could come back and look at the same tree in subsequent years, which is what some of our 7th graders do every 5 years, and you'll actually see how well that tree is putting on wood, how much larger that diameter is.
Sleeping alone, so tired of eating alone. I need to ask her, what's going on? Are we going strong?
So of course you're going to want to determine the height of your trees, and for this we're going to use a Forester's clinometer and our measuring tape. We are going to go out 50 feet, and we will be using this clinometer with the little red dot facing up to look both up to the top of the tree and down at its base. You will be looking most likely at the right side of your clinometer, and by looking at where the little hash mark inside matches up to the top of the tree, so that means you have to have both eyes open, one eye going through the clinometer, the other eye sighting the top of that tree, and then down to the base. You're looking at basically 2 different angles, and you will subtract the bottom number from the top number. Now more than likely, even though I'll go out 50 feet at the same elevation, 0 is probably going to be kind of midway coming up the tree a little bit, so I will probably have a negative number. What happens when you subtract a negative number? You'll actually be adding 2 numbers. Once we do that, we'll divide it by 2 because you're going 50 feet out. That's 50% of the area we normally would go out. Normally it'd be 100 feet, but in a forest it's really hard to see the trees if you go out 100 feet. So top number minus the bottom number, and then 50% of that. 50 feet number of 88. I go to the bottom of the tree, I get a negative number of 7, negative 7. So 88 minus negative 7, so 88 plus 7 will give me 95. And then 50% of 95, well, I know 50% of 90 is 45, and 50% of 5 is about 2.5, so we'll go up. So about 48 feet. 48 feet is the height of this tree. Good luck making those measurements on your own. You guys will do a great job. 48 feet for the size of that ponderosa pine.
She felt like resting her head. My shoulder was the perfect height. We fit so right.
We've just come from the ponderosa pine forest, which is a little more open, a lot more spacing between the trees. Ponderosa pines just love having space. They adapted and evolved to having frequent, fast, low-burning fires. Now that's not true with this other species of tree. This, of course, is our Douglas fir tree, a friendly fir. You can always shake a friendly fir. See if any of you guys remember that from 4th grade. And the pine cone of the Douglas fir is always cool because it looks like little mouse tails coming out. Each of these little bracts looks like a little mouse tail in the back legs. Maybe you remember hearing a story about the mice running away from a fire and finding shelter in the Douglas fir tree. When the fire had gone through quickly, they were able to get off of the tree, and as appreciation to this day, you can still see the little mouse tails. Fun little story there. But the other interesting part about a Douglas fir is that it loves the shade. It is a shade-tolerant species. You very commonly hear it being called a ladder fuel. We have some perfect ladder fuel here with some juniper growing right up against our Douglas fir. Our Douglas fir here is out competing a ponderosa pine that's right next to it. So it's very possible that this tree is getting more of the sunlight, more of the nutrients, more of the moisture. And this is where I've decided we might want to compare temperature readings. This would have been a nice thing we could have done in the field, so I'll be doing it for you. Our last temperature reading was about 54 degrees Fahrenheit, 6 inches down in the ground. In an area that does not get any sunlight, let's see what kind of temperature we get here. And it already is going down. Our last temperature reading was about 54, 52 degrees. I would expect this temperature reading to be closer to maybe 50 degrees, maybe about a 2-degree temperature change. So some of the differences you might see, especially on a hot day, when the sun's beating down and you just don't have a lot of cover. Canopy cover matters, ground cover matters, and these cooler temperatures down in the microclimate are really helping this Douglas fir tree outcompete some of the ponderosa pines in this area.
So what's going on? 'Cause I've been undone. The long drive, the coastline, looking.
This location is perfect for showing you the difference of aspect, and that's the direction that the hill where these trees are leans to. So if we look up here, we have kind of an example of more of a south-facing drier hill on this side, and on the other side we have more of the wetter north side that's getting more of the moisture and has cooler temperatures, and you get more tree growth on those sides. So as we look at some of these plots, we'll want to think about, do we have more southern, drier exposure here? Or as we come up over the hill here, facing us to the north, we're getting a greater density of trees. So aspect matters, whether you're north-facing or south-facing.
First light, am I still on her mind? I've been undone.